Let's introduce you first to our audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a 38-year-old activist out of Atlanta, Georgia. I spent 13 years working in the restaurant industry, doing everything from being a dishwasher to actually running restaurants and opening up new businesses for entrepreneurs. And I moved my way into the world of logistics, where I learned about how interconnected markets are and about how great free trade is. And so I've always been a libertarian activist, and I just got into the political realm because I just said people need to have more choices out there, and certainly my generation, the millennial generation, needs to get to work representing this country. So I'm happy to be a millennial candidate for president and one who supports free markets, voluntary exchange, and the idea that if you're not harming anybody, your life should be your life.
And Mike, we've hosted you on the program before. You joined us when you were out here in Colorado. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I wish I were in Colorado with you right now rather than outside of the White House, but it is a gorgeous day here, and I hope you're having a good day too.
So what are you guys doing outside the White House there? We can see you on video. You get it's beautiful out back.
Yeah, we were just scoping the real estate for potential places to live in a few months. And also, we went by the treasury to make sure we reminded people that we're being taken advantage of by undue taxation. And, you know, really, we're just kind of in the belly of the beast, seeing exactly what departments we're going to get rid of if we were elected. And boy, there's an awful lot of them out here, and it's going to take us all day to see them all.
All right, so traditionally, libertarians get about 2 to 3% of the vote. That was kind of Donald Trump's message in that room. Come on, guys, join the winners, join the Republicans. Why should people vote for libertarians this election cycle?
Because Republicans and Democrats ought to be joining with us. We're the winners because we've got the values that align with Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are millions of Americans who have expressed extreme dissatisfaction with the two-party system. They're dying for something different. And, you know, we're going to provide something that's very different because it doesn't matter how conservative or how you live your life, or if you live your life with different values, if you're not using the force of government, that implies more prosperity, more diversity in the marketplace, more options for people to choose from as consumers. And that's better for everybody. That's how you really build prosperity. And it's time for the next generation to hear this message. And I hope to be the messenger that those young folks in America who are just getting started in the economy could be happy knowing that we have better days ahead of us if we embrace the concepts of liberty and economic freedom.
Talking with Chase Oliver and Mike Maat, a Libertarian presidential and vice presidential candidate. These are the big ones for the entire nation. Now, we had yesterday Hannah Goodman. She's the chair of the Colorado Libertarian Party. And Chase, she said she's not a fan and, in fact, will likely be supporting Donald Trump. What happened there? Why is Hannah going the other direction?
You know, I don't know exactly why. I've met Hannah a time or two, and I can't speak to her individual choices that she makes out there. But if she doesn't like me personally, I can apologize to her, but I hope she doesn't go for a candidate who raised the deficit more than in a single year than any other, who locked us down with COVID lockdowns and mandates, the candidate who airstriked Syria and killed so many innocent people, and who continued drone bombing without reporting how many civilians it was killing. I hope that any personal disagreement between us would not be something that would make her abandon those libertarian principles, because I want to be a unit candidate. I want to bring libertarians back together from across the spectrum, even if they didn't vote for me on the floor of the convention. I want to be their libertarian candidate, supporting those universal libertarian principles. And so if there's a personality difference, I look forward to meeting her in Colorado and maybe speaking those out, because I sure hope she doesn't abandon liberty for Donald Trump.
I think part of the critique, Chase, is that you'd supported BLM in the past, or transing kids, mask mandates, even men and women's sports.
She called you woke.
Yeah, I think she did. She called you woke. Is that part of the stuff that you support?
I've never supported any mask or vaccine mandates. Absolutely. I oppose the COVID tyranny that came down from our government 100%. Now, what I do say is if you're a property owner, that's your property. You can determine if someone has to wear a mask or shirt or shoes like you do in every gas station across America. That's property rights in action. That's actual liberty. And even if people are making decisions that I don't agree with, that's the marketplace that will determine those out. As for other decisions, of course, I'm somebody who supports police accountability. And I'm not a member of Black Lives Matter because that's a communist organization, but I absolutely support the idea that police need to be held accountable. I was marching in 2020 when the National Guard came to Atlanta, Georgia, and made things way more tense than they needed to be when we were peacefully protesting. And I understand the difference between letting government make decisions for people and letting people make decisions for people. And so when it comes to the ideas of medical care or anything else, I leave that in individual sovereign hands of people who aren't me, because I am not in the business of making medical decisions for other people. And if that makes me not, I'm not asleep at the wheel. I'm somebody who understands what's going on in the world. And we have to recognize that liberty affords diversity in this world.
How about open borders? Would you support the mass deportation of illegal immigrants from this country?
If that were even economically feasible, it would be unconscionable. We would lose a major labor market we have in this country that we need. We need these jobs here. What we need to do to fix the immigration crisis is recognize it's not caused by immigrants wanting to come here and work and use their power, their labor to create prosperity for themselves. It's done by a government that makes that process nearly impossible. We need a 21st century Ellis Island where peaceful people can come through, declare who they are, and then get to work in the jobs that we need filled across America. And yes, we should also simplify the process for those who come here and work and say, hey, there's an American dream for me too. There should be a process for those people to also become citizens. 40% of this nation can trace a relative that came through Ellis Island in the last major wave of migration. And they built this country. They built the businesses. They built this country up. And we need to afford that for the next generation. I think that's a good thing for our economy and a good thing for our country.
Talking with Chase Oliver and Mike Maat, Libertarian presidential and vice presidential candidate, just got nominated this past weekend, joining us on the Jeff and Bill show. All right, let's talk drugs. Most people, when they look at libertarians, they're like, well, they want what happened in Portland, kind of the full decriminalization of drugs and people using meth in streets and stuff like that. What's your response to the concern about aggressive drug use and drug decriminalization?
I'll let Mike take the lead on that a little
Jeff
bit.
and Bill, look, you guys know I was a police officer for 12 years in Broward County, Florida. Any cop worth his salt who's been paying attention can tell you that the war on drugs doesn't work. We're not advocating that people go out and use drugs. What we're advocating for is getting the government out of it. Indeed, if there's anyone out there who can hear our voice and decide, oh, I think I'll go out and use heroin for the first time because the state of Florida isn't going to stop me from using it. That's silly stuff. That's not going to happen. Cops know that our current regime doesn't work. What it does is it drives drug use into the shadows, into the black market, underground. It makes it exceedingly dangerous. I personally have done CPR on 12 people who have been affected by their drug use because they weren't able to reach out and get the help that they need. We need to bring this market out into the open and treat it like the medical problem that it is.
I want to speak to that medical problem side of things. There are amazing organizations that do direct and mutual aid in these communities to help addicts get off of the drugs, or at least help them use safely until they're ready to get off the drugs, which creates harm reduction. I know of an organization in the state of Oklahoma that has saved over 1,000 lives because they gave out Narcan to users, knowing that, hey, those guys, if they OD, they're going to save themselves the Narcan and think, maybe this is the time for me to get off the drugs. And they've also helped people get sober and back to a stable lifestyle. That is what we need to see from our individual charities and communities. Government doesn't facilitate that very well. They fail at nearly everything they do. To think that they're going to help addicts is also an idea that, well, that's pretty crazy considering they don't do everything else really well. And so I think we need to leave that in the hands of organizations that can provide that. And I hope individuals get to those organizations to help their communities out of this. That's the thing that was missing too much in some of these communities. And I would like to see applied across the country as we end war on drugs.
By the way, fellas, the problem in Portland was not the decriminalization. They have a policing problem. They're not asking their police force to do what it is the citizens want the police force to do. And they didn't fully decriminalize because it's still a licensure problem for who is able to provide these drugs, meaning the drug control, the control of drugs by people who are criminals still goes on.
Yeah, just like we did with Al Capone during Prohibition. Prohibition creates crime. And if you want safer communities, you have to end the practice of prohibition.
Chase Oliver and Mike Maat, Libertarian presidential and vice presidential candidates, joining Jeff and Bill live on the air. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. I want to explore some of what you were talking about there as far as addiction and recovery. One of the pushes that we've had here by state Democrats are to open up harm reduction sites. I understand and respect what you're saying about not having them be state or federally funded, but instead private funding. The experiences that individuals at the station and elsewhere have done, we've had a field trip up to Vancouver, in and around those safe injection sites, it's nothing you necessarily want in the community. And the recovery from those safe injection sites is a small percentage at best. Is that really the best way forward, or do you feel there's a different way forward as far as addiction recovery?
Well, I'm not an expert in addiction recovery, so I can't speak what would be the best mechanisms. But as you're seeing, the government mechanisms aren't very effective. And I have to believe that the private mechanisms and people who have actually been in the trenches, who aren't bureaucrats who sit on boards, but people who have actually been in the streets as activists reacting to this problem in the streets, many of them former addicts themselves, are going to find better ways to facilitate those things. Here's one thing I will say to those who might be listening out there. If you're suffering from addiction, there is no one path to sobriety. There are many paths to sobriety. I urge you to find them. I know many friends who are using the path. Actually, one of our candidates who's running alongside us, Libertarian nomination, is somebody who spoke eloquently about how they overcame addiction in their teens. And that's the kind of message you want to put out there. You can be responsible for yourself, but we don't need some sort of violent government apparatus throwing people in jail and enabling cartels to make profits south of our borders and creating violence south of the border, which is part of the immigration drive we were talking about earlier. We can fix this with better solutions, but it involves listening to those who are actually in the trenches and not people who sit on government boards and have been bureaucrats for decades.
You make a good point there that I can agree with, especially given the experience of Step Denver, a proud supporter of the station and friends of the show, where they take no federal funding and have a really good track record. Not perfect, but a very, very good track record at getting people off the street and getting them through addiction. Because again, it's about accountability and recovery and getting them into jobs. So I can see how that's going. Now, I want to expand and kind of turn this premise of the conversation into the Second Amendment. You talked about prohibition as far as drugs being a negative. Would you say the same thing is true on firearms? In Colorado, we have a balance right now and a real push-pull between our firearm rights. Our Colorado state legislature, controlled by Democrats, just tried in this last session to classify nearly every firearm you can imagine as an assault weapon. Is your solution to some of the issues we're having with gun violence the fact that we need more guns or less guns? Explain, please.
I'll tell you, and I think any cop worth his salt will tell you, is that gun control doesn't work. The truth of the matter is, if you're a police officer and you're in charge of a particular facility, cops all over the United States will tell you they welcome the idea of responsible citizens being armed at that facility, because it is true that good guys with guns make places safer. And taking guns away from people, first of all, it's a violation of our Constitution. Second of all, it's a violation of your right to have whatever object on you that you want. And third of all, it just doesn't work in terms of making our communities safer.
Yeah, I'm from Georgia. We're a constitutional carry state. I can open carry or concealed carry without the need to get a permit. And we're just fine in the state of Georgia. It's not the wild, wild west out there. And I open carry pretty much anywhere I can do so. As an example, to those out there that says you can be a responsible gun owner and be quite visible doing it. I also believe that shall not be infringed is about the most clear constitutional language we can have. And so we need to really take people's hands off their right to self-defense. And, I'll be honest. I know a lot of people who live in rural communities where the police are 20 minutes away at best. If someone's invading property and their family, they should have the right to defend themselves. And as far as these assault weapon bans, people need to remember, assault rifles, the quote-unquote scary rifles they think of, commit less than 3% gun deaths in this country. Most are done with handguns, and everybody knows you have the right to have a handgun. And nobody should be trying to outlaw that. See the Supreme Court if you try. Where you're right here in Washington, D.C., where they attempted that, and it got smacked down. And I will smack down any kind of gun legislation that would make your right to take care of yourself, your family, and your property the way you see fit in peace. Because you know what? If you're not trying to shoot anybody that's not trying to harm you, what's the problem?
I appreciate the answer, and I can agree on a lot of that, but I want to focus in on one qualifying phrase that was used in that answer, and that is responsible gun ownership. I am unconvinced that as a whole, Americans are demonstrating responsible gun ownership based on the numbers that we have in gun violence. Can you convince me otherwise?
Well, that's a matter of education. That's a matter of teaching people how better to handle their guns, when to draw, when not to draw, what the situations are when you use a gun. I've always learned that you're not supposed to sit there and wait for the bad guys to come in. The reason why I have a gun is my home's being invaded so that I can make my quick exit. And if I need to use it, I will use it. I don't stand there waiting to use it.
I hate to interrupt, but how do we, I understand the idea about education, but how do we accomplish that? Because that is not a tenet anywhere inside the Second Amendment, nor is it as far as any far gun legislation. You don't have to take a single class. You don't have to have a single conversation with anyone realistically before owning a firearm. So explain to me how we get to that education platform that you say is so important in order to make us responsible gun owners. How does that happen?
Guys, education is important, but let's be honest about having a common fact base here. The reason that we have this perception that Americans are not responsible in terms of handling their guns is because there's so much violence in the United States, and that violence often leverages the use of a gun. Almost all of that is either conducted by criminals who would not be dissuaded by any kind of gun control and are not dissuaded by any kind of gun. We're sitting in Washington, D.C., the most gun-controlled place on the planet, and parenthetically, one of the most dangerous places in the world regarding homicide. And the other huge group of gun violence is suicide. No one is asserting that this is a group of horrific incidents that could in any way, shape, or form be reduced because of gun control.
Well, but if the issue is violence or the idea that it's easier to commit suicide, why then would you give those violent people or the people contemplating suicide access to firearms to make it easier for them to either commit the violence that you say they desire or to kill themselves? Why would we make it easier if that's their end goal?
Right. The last time you and I interviewed together, you used the same phrase, advocating, giving. I don't think Chase or I has ever said that we want some program to pass out guns. What we're saying is it's your right to decide for yourself whether or not to have a gun, right? We agree on that. And that if you're going to overcome that ethic somehow, it would at least, even to have a discussion, even to have an argument, you would have to be able to make the case that it makes the world safer. And as a matter of empirical evidence, it doesn't.
I think also a lot of the violence that we see in our society is a matter of this hyper-partisanship, the way that we're separating further and further from ourselves. It's indicative of the either-or society that we live in with the two-party system politically, and that you have to be with us or against the society that we have everywhere else. And I think that's a cultural problem. And culture is downstream from politics, or politics rather is downstream from culture. And so that's something we have to change with ourselves. It not necessarily will be changed with any kind of legislation. If we have violence and division in our country, we'll have violence and division with or without guns. The constitutional language of shall not be infringed is still clear. We have to address those issues in ways that don't involve gun control because the Constitution specifically prevents us from using the method of gun control to try to address these issues.
Well, yes and no. There's an independent dependent clause involved in that Second Amendment, and I'm not going to get English class right now, but it's not as cut and dry as you're leading us to believe.
Talking with Chase Oliver and Mike Termont, Libertarian presidential and vice presidential candidates just nominated over the weekend. So grateful they're on the show. Just a few last questions. We got a text message or a call yesterday from somebody. They saw the sign behind the speakers at the Libertarian convention that said ungovernable, and the A kind of looked like it was the anarchy A. What's your response to people that are concerned that if they nominate a libertarian, we're just going to end up with anarchy?
Well, I'm not an anarchist. I'm philosophically a minarchist. Small government, it's a classically liberal valued person, but there's plenty of anarchists in our movement. We join them in the movement because they want to reduce the state too. Now, we'll get to a point where we will definitely disagree. On that day, the argument will be fierce in the hall, and there will be lots of division between our communities. But until then, we both recognize that it's too large, too abusive, and too intrusive. And we will join with anybody who wants to reduce the size of the state from where it is today to make it a smaller size tomorrow. That's the type of community building. That's the coalition we need to build. And anarchists, who philosophically have definitely been a part of the libertarian philosophy, are part of that. They should be joining alongside folks like myself in reducing the size and state of the state today. And then we'll get to the argument about whether a state exists or not. But we both agree that it's too big and too abusive right here, right now, and it's time for that to change.
Chase Oliver and Mike Termont, Libertarian presidential and vice presidential candidates, giving us more than generous with their time today. Thank you so much on the Jeff and Bill Show. I want to kind of have all of us pretend for a moment. We're going to jump ahead and let's assume that you guys have created the largest upset in American politics. You have captured the White House. The big question I hear a lot of things that really attract me about the Libertarian Party. But if you guys arrive in the White House, can you get anything done? Because you're going to have to work with a Congress and you have no allies. Why would the Democrats or Republicans want to see you succeed? How do you navigate that minefield potentially?
We have lots of tools at our disposal. First, and the most powerful tool is the veto pen. If legislation comes up that adds to debt and deficit, increases the size of government, I will exercise the full authority to veto. We also have the power of the pardon. We can make example of the fact that there are far too many victimless crimes out there. We need to refocus our criminal justice system on crimes of actual harm, force, fraud, coercion, theft, and violence. That's the purpose of law enforcement. That's why I have a former law enforcement officer who also believes in police accountability on my ticket, because we understand that there is a need for that. But what there is a need for is the over-criminalized society we have. And of course, we'll work with any party that's actually wanting to get the job done, whether they be Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian. We don't label people as they come in the door. We listen to their ideas. We respect them, their ability to speak. We'll disagree where we need to disagree, but we'll get to work getting to work. I also believe that if that condition happens and we win the White House, we're going to have some libertarian Congress people and hopefully some libertarian senators to really throw the balance out of whack and let people know that if you want to get things done, it's only going to be through the libertarian prison in America.
Chase Oliver and Mike Termont joining us on the Jeff and Bill Show. You can visit their website, votechaseoliver.com or MikeTermont.com. He spells his last name MikeTermaat.com. You can learn more about these guys. Hey, thanks so much for being friends of the show. Thank you for taking the tough questions. We really appreciate your time and very best of luck on the race ahead.
Yeah, good luck.
Very much. Thanks, guys. Good to be with you.
Jeff and Bill, weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 710, KNUS.